Hear God's word. Good morning. Good morning. So I hope you guys felt encouraged. I hope you felt loved. I hope you took a picture of someone who you will message and contact this week. And I also want to say, if you don't have a phone that takes a picture, just stare at someone long enough, just not in a creepy way, so you can create a memory. So contact them this week. So we're going through this series talking about love. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because, as Walt mentioned very well this morning, everything hinges on love. Love for God, love for people, and all the other commandments are the applications of obedience to loving God and loving people. And so we talked about how our marriages need to be founded on God, and we need to let God define marriage. And last week we talked about creating an environment in which your marriage can flourish. And this week, I was just thinking about how we're going to be hitting a lot of the aspects of love that tells us what love is not. Now, growing up, I used to go to marriage seminars. Even before I was married, when I was a teenager, I started going to marriage seminars when I was a teenager because I knew someday I wanted to be married. Someday I wanted to be a good spouse. I've read hundreds of marriage books and things like that, listened to a lot of married people. But one of the best pieces of advice that I got was from Disney. And she made the comment, you know, one of the best things married people can do is be a friend to their spouse. It sounds so simple because I'm one of those people that I needed to be a better friend to Disney because there are some times where I'm really good at my checkoff list. I'm known as the to-do list guy. Every day I have this huge long list of to-dos and I get them done. I'm one of those, Mark talks about being a type A person. I'm one of those people that I try to bite my tongue and I'm getting all these things done. I'm good at doing the marriage checkoff list. Yep, that's what a good husband does. That's what a good provider does. That's what a good father does. That's what a good, janitor does. Cleaning up the house, helping the wife. But one of the boxes that I need to do a better job on, and I needed to do a better job on, was check the box of being a better friend. Have you ever really thought about that for a moment? And I thought about this for a moment, that some of the best marriages that you think of people who you think, they've got a good marriage. I took some time and I thought about this for years thinking, who had the best marriages and what was one of the attributes? And one of the attributes that I noticed from these couples was that they were friends. And I thought about this. When people are looking for their future mate and they are going through that dating or courting stage, one of the things that they do is they build that friendship. And they're eager to call each other on the phone. They're eager to text each other. They're eager to see each other. They're eager to go out and do things together. And then sometimes when people get married, it's like they stop being friends. We know responsibility and life and kids and job, they start getting in the way of that friendship. To the point where it seems like so many people are stop being friends and they start becoming college roommates who can't afford to live apart from each other financially, so they stick together. Or they'll be combative. They turn from friends to enemies. And when I do marriage counseling, it's like, here are people who were best friends, in love with each other, and now they're fighting as if they're like the worst enemy. How did that happen? When I was thinking about when I was younger, despite being an introvert, I've actually had enough friends where I was actually a part of a lot of weddings where I wasn't the minister, I was part of the groom's party. And the first wedding I was really a part of was I was the best man. And I got to do the best man speech. And so I was writing some stuff and some really unique stuff. And then I also stole a line from a TV show called Boy Meets World. I don't know if anyone remembers that 90s TV show. But it's really about these two best friend kids, and then one of the guys marries this girl. But I stole a line from that wedding episode where this kid named Sean tells his friend Corey, he says, we're best friends, but I can't be that anymore. She has to be your best friend. You're marrying your best friend. She now takes my spot. And I thought, you know what? And so I used that in this wedding speech, because me and my best friend, we were close. We were like Corey and Sean and Boy Meets World. We were always hanging out together until she came along, you know. And I did the speech about her being a best friend. But then a few years later, they stopped being friends. And then they got divorced. And then now they're just co-parents. And oftentimes in marriage we do that. We're roommates, or we're co-parents, or we're the Uber service to take our kids to soccer practice. We need to get back to being friends. And one of the things that I thought about in this text that we're going over in 1 Corinthians 13, we're going to cover 3 aspects of our relationships that kind of destroy friendship and relationship. That if you think, you know what, this is an aspect, if someone treated me this way, I wouldn't want to be their friend. And if I was a friend to someone else, I wouldn't treat them that way. This is one of the things that all of us can work on. I can be the first one to admit that. But one of the things that we want to see here is, if we want to go about marriage God's way, we have to let God define love and understand, how do we approach a marriage so that we can be better friends. Think about your spouse. Maybe you're not as close as you used to be, but was there a time when you were excited? You were joyful. You didn't care what mundane thing your spouse talked about. You were just excited to be in their presence. I want every marriage couple to get back to that. And people say, how can we do that? One of the answers is learning to be friends again. You know, a lot of you have gone through the book, His Needs, Her Needs, and Dr. Harley wrote that book, and he said one of the things he always prescribed was for married people to spend at a minimum 15 hours of quality alone time together to rebuild their friendship. And I thought, you know what a great piece of advice. And you know, if you ask me what's my favorite thing really to do in the week now, it's going on coffee dates with Disney. You know, it's not as expensive as a dinner, and we sit down drinking the lifeblood of champions. It's great. And so one of the things that we do is we just sit and talk. And it's about random normal things. It's not like we have this exciting life. Hey, guess what I did? I jumped out of an airplane this week. No, I didn't do that. I'd be like, hey, I worked and read a book and talked to people. But, you know, this is something we all need to work on. I'll be the first to admit, I need to work on this. And as an introvert, I have to work twice as hard sometimes, to Disney, to my kids, to all of you. And on the things that we're going to cover is stuff that's not just relevant to you and your spouse, but just each other. And if we can do these things, we'll have better relationships in general, but especially with our spouse. So in 1 Corinthians 13:5, it says, it, referring to love, is not rude. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. Now think about this. Last week we talked about having an environment in which we allow love to grow organically. And today we're going to look at 3 more things of what love is not. And if I asked you, if you had rudeness, selfishness, and unbiblical anger in a relationship, does that grow a friendship? Think about your worst enemies that you have in your life, or people who just picked on you, bullies. Did they have rudeness? Were they selfish? Were they angry? Or look at the relationships that you've had in your life. Have some of the relationships that used to be good not be as good, but more of the character of rudeness, selfishness, and anger kind of become a part of that? These are 3 aspects of a relationship that will destroy a friendship. And so if we're regrowing marriage by regrowing friendship, we got to work on these areas. And I know sometimes this is a growth process. It's going to take time, energy, effort, work. But this is a goal that we need to aspire to. So one of the things that we see here is love is not rude. The definition of rudeness is discourteous, impolite, rough, harsh, or ungentle, especially in a deliberate way. If I asked you, does anyone here know of a rude person in their life? You could say yes. Anyone ever read the comment section of news articles on the internet? They're not nice. You want to know why I do not have Twitter? Because people are not nice. Everyone's a keyboard warrior. I can be as rude as I want while I'm sitting in my pajamas eating Cheetos. I can be as rude as I want to someone and I'll look so amazing. And in fact, when someone else sees a rude person saying a rude comment, then another person adds a rude comment. Rudeness just spreads like wildfire. And oftentimes this happens also in marriage. That sometimes a discourteous, ungentle kind of thing happens. And then one is rude to another, and then another one's rude to another person, and then they just bounce off each other, and it just grows and grows and grows and grows. So the marriage is more characterized by rudeness. But this is not the case it should be. Ephesians 4:29 says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." And so, should we ever treat our spouse or anyone in general with rudeness? Even if someone's wrong, you can be convicted, you can stand up for truth, you can be right, you can be a herald of whatever is just and righteous, but it doesn't mean you have to be rude. And in fact, standing up and saying and doing the right things without rudeness is actually one of the most powerful things you can do. But you have to ask, is my rude behavior beneficial? Or is what I'm saying encouraging? We want to encourage good behavior and not display our rudeness. At some point you have to choose, do I want to encourage or do I want to be rude? Do I want to be right or do I want growth? And this is a different change of mentality that we need to have. And so people will ask, well, how is rudeness manifested? We'll go over a few lists. Like indifference to the value and feelings of others. You've seen this word indifference a lot in a lot of these lists that we've been going through, because indifference is really one of the opposites of love. You just don't care. Another one is words and actions that bring harm to others rather than good. Or a lack of consideration, thoughtfulness, and gentleness. You don't care, you just want to say what you want to say. Or how about this one? Use other people's insecurities to hurt them. This is one of the reasons why married people tend to hurt each other more than anyone else in your life, because you know each other's insecurities, you know what buttons to push, you know how to say and do the things that could cut the deepest. And so because of that, people will cut the deepest to their spouse. But this is a part of rudeness we don't want. A lack of propriety and manners. Have polite society, polite church. Bullying other people and condescending to others. You've seen people, you can tell who's a jerk and not a jerk. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see who's a nice person, who's a mean person. Another one responds back to others with a hurtful or vengeful spirit. Rude people are often vigilantes in their own minds, and they are vengeful. Or another part is participation in gossip, complaining, and slander. They don't want to just hurt you, they want to include others in hurting you. And so that's how rudeness is often manifested. So how can we prevent some of the marital rudeness in our marriages? One of the things we can do is remember Christ showed you kindness when you did not deserve it. If I ask you how many of you deserve the wrath of God, all of us would say, me. I'm the first one to admit that. I deserve the wrath of God. Who here deserves hell? Everyone, raise your hands. Now how many of us deserve heaven? But guess what? God would not be rude in saying go to hell, because that's what we justifiably deserve. But He showed us kindness. He showed us love. He showed us compassion when we did not deserve it. He could have just been tough and said, tough, deal with it. You knew better. I gave you the Bible. Your fault. He didn't do that. He could have, but He didn't. Another one is follow the golden rule. One of the things I emphasize to my kids every day we go over the greatest commandments and we go over the golden rule. My kids are probably sick of it, but it's the things I want my kids to learn. Treat others how you want to be treated. Do you want people to be rude to you? Don't be rude to them. It's really that simple. Realize that words and actions have consequences to you and your spouse. This is a hard one because in the moment it's easy to be rude and right and justified, but then you have to realize, is this worth the damage I am causing with my words and actions? Another one, you know how to hurt your spouse, So do not even go to those areas. Consider their areas of hurt and pain. We know our spouse's weak points. And when we are trying to win, we push at those spots. And it's important for us just to say, you know what, in that territory we need to not go there. And we need to do that for each other as well. This one, be the one person in their life they can count on to be kind to them, especially when others in their life aren't kind. Anyone rude to you at work? Customers? Co-workers? Boss? The crazy lady at the grocery store? You know, be the one person your spouse can come home to and expect kindness. That will be a source of security and comfort at home. Another one, say only. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I'm just going to share the truth. Well, ask yourself, is it kind? Is it true? Is it necessary? And is it helpful in regards to what I'm going to tell my spouse? Realize that rudeness encourages other people to be rude. Not only does rudeness cause hurt in people's life, it usually causes other people to add insult by adding in, participating in that. And then another one, don't participate in gossip, drama, complaining, and victimization. That is one of the things that we want to stop and discourage, because those things will encourage rudeness to grow. And that emotionally and spiritually affects people tremendously. We've all been the recipients of those things. Another one that we see here is love is not self-seeking. Selfishness. You know, one of the things that sociologists have said is, they've said selfishness has always existed, but they claim, and these are secular people, sociologists saying, we are the most selfish culture that has ever existed. We are the most prideful culture that has ever existed. And then when another example is, you know, I mentioned selfies. I mentioned social media. You know, the whole purpose of Facebook is really to say, hey, I have a page devoted to me. Look at me. And I was thinking about, how people take selfies. Do you know they're now starting to count how many people are dying from trying to have really good selfie pictures? Because people are doing these extreme things to say, hey, everyone look at how good I am. And I thought, you know, what's crazy about looking at selfies is I think about all the beauty that people see out in like nature. But despite taking a nice picture of like a mountain or a tree or a waterfall, they take a picture of themselves. It's like they go to this nice, beautiful place like Monongah Falls in Oregon, and they'll have this nice, beautiful waterfall, and then they'll take a selfie, and like 90% of the picture is their face, and then 10% of it's the waterfall. And I'm like, here you have something so much more beautiful than your face. No offense, but here, and you should be taking a picture of that. And sometimes we do that with God. We kind of say, you know what, God? I know you're beautiful and glorious. And we'll say it to our spouse, you're beautiful and glorious. Marriage is beautiful and glorious. But I'm going to take this picture. 90% me, 10% you. Do you see how that's flawed? And we wonder why our marriages are in the way they are. It's because we're so focused on being selfish. You know, the definition of selfishness is devoted first and foremost to oneself, concerned primarily with one's own interests, benefits, welfare, and etc., regardless of others. And in fact, this is what we're taught not to do. You know, Philippians 2, 3 through 5, that chapter is one of my favorite passages in the Bible. But it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. You know, if Jesus took a selfie, he could take a picture of a selfie and everyone should be bowing down to that picture. But do you know what he did? He took a selfie and it was 10% him and 90% us. Just to think, that's the humility Christ had. And he said, you know what? My church is beautiful. My bride is beautiful. You see, if he took a picture of him and his spouse, it wouldn't be a selfie of 90% of his face and 10% of his bride. It was 10% of me. And I'll lower myself for the sake of my bride. So my bride is going to be the main part of the picture. And for guys, our wives are prettier than we are, so make them 90% of the picture. But that's what Christ did. In James 3:13-16 he says, "Who is wise and understanding among you? Let them show it by their good life, by deeds done in humility that comes from wisdom. But if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast about it or deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." Selfishness leads to disorder and every evil practice. Selfishness is the wisdom of the world. Isn't that what the world says? Be selfish. Think about you. You know, on Twitter, you are the most important person, so everyone cares about what you have to say. Wrong. Do you see how we need to combat this? How has selfishness ever blessed a marriage? Have you ever thought about that? Isn't your main complaint against your spouse is at times they're selfish, but then sometimes we neglect the fact that we ourselves in the marriage are sometimes selfish? Do you see how this causes disorder even in our marriages? You know, how is selfishness manifested? You know, it demonstrates a self-focused attitude. It's always putting the selfie on yourself rather than on your bride or on your husband or on especially God. It puts one's own wants, needs, and feelings first. That says, that's the priority. You are meant to serve me. That's why God created you. You weren't created for God's purpose and glory. You're made for my purpose and glory. That's the wrong attitude. Where we kind of worship our feelings. We worship our needs. We worship our wants. And we ask, why doesn't my spouse care about my wants, needs, and feelings as much as I do? Don't they realize who they married? This guy. It's just like, but who are you? Really? Another one is selfishness is use other people as a means to an end. Have you ever felt like that? People use you. They don't care about you, but they use you for a purpose. And that's sometimes in marriage, people will do that. They'll use the other person as a means for their own glory, their own pleasure, their own end. Another one is willingness to deprive or take from others so one can gain. You know, a lot of times people in marriages will say, well, there's a giver and a taker. Well, and a lot of times that is really true. But what if both people were the givers in the relationship? What if both of them said, I will be the giver, and we try to outdo each other in the giving? Instead of saying, you know what, I get more by taking from you. And that's one of the things of what happens in marriage, is they'll say, I want more, so I have to take it from you. What if we started, and you know what the weird thing about the Bible? The more you give, the more you actually receive back. Whereas the world says the more you take, the less you actually get back. That's a weird, different way of thinking. But that's how it needs to be. Wanting to be first and the most important. We met people like that. Reserves the best for oneself. Have you ever met people, they always had to have the best? I've met married people. Well, I met this guy where he would always buy himself the nicest things, and then his wife would get the handy-down thing that he's replacing. And I'm like, are you serious, dude? Are you really giving your wife your hand-me-downs and you get the best thing and she's supposed to be grateful that she gets the hand-me-down? I was like, you got to rethink your priorities there. A lack of sacrifice for others for their benefit. A lack of concern if others suffer or struggle as long as one gets what one wants. Have you ever met people like that? They don't care if you are hurting or struggling or sacrificing. As long as I get what I want, I don't care. That's one of the main problems in our culture. People just don't care. As long as I get what I want and do what I do, I don't care. Another one is a willingness to a lack of willingness to change for others. Selfish people want to be selfish and they glory in being selfish. Selfless people will say, I may not be perfect and it will take time, it will take work, it will take humility, but I want to progress toward that point where I'm willing to grow and change. First and foremost for God, but then also for my spouse, and then for my kids, and then for my church family, and for the lost guy down the corner who I need to reach for Jesus. You know, we grow and we're selfless because we're always thinking of others first. So here's some advice to prevent marital selfishness. Remember, God values you and your spouse equally. You have equal value. You know, one of the main reasons why pride and selfishness are often married together, like we saw in Philippians 2, is because we tend to say, I'm worth more than you, therefore what I want is justified because of who I am in comparison to who you are. That's the wrong way of thinking. When you realize God made them male and female and both in His image, realize you're equal. Different roles, but remember, roles don't determine value. Christ determines value, and we're made in the image of God. But in that, we realize my spouse's needs, feelings, wants should be as equal to my feelings and needs and wants. Mine should never be more than hers. Hers should never be more than mine. But first and foremost, if we're going to prioritize someone, it's always God. Another one, don't be proud, but honor your spouse. Selfish people always love the attention of themselves, and they prioritize that. Another one is consider their needs before your own. You know, selfish people are always considerate about what they get. Think about what your spouse needs to get. Another one, don't justify selfishness and act entitled. Selfish people always act entitled. I've noticed that. Well, I have a right to do this because do you know who I am and what I've done? Well, congratulations. That's what I tell people sometimes. I'll just start golf clapping. You're like, congratulations. You're amazing. You're wonderful. Okay, but it never justifies selfishness. Jesus had the reason to actually say, I'm the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. If anyone could think about themselves first, it could have been Jesus. He could have called legion of angels and destroyed the world, and he would have been justified. He's the only one in human history who would have been justified to do something for himself and been right in doing it. We can't say that because our motivation is not always love. Sometimes it's selfishness, and we can't justify it. Another one is don't over-dwell on your feelings. You know, feelings are valid, and we need to validate feelings. We need to communicate our feelings. We need to be open with our feelings, but also be careful that we don't run to such an extreme that our feelings are the first and most important thing in our lives, to the point where we end up dwelling on them so much so that we justify being a victim and justifying being selfish. You know what the crazy thing is? Sometimes people will read the Bible very selfishly. Did you know that? Like, for example, love your neighbor as yourself. And you know what? A lot of people will say, the way I read that is, I got to love myself most in order to love you. So I'm just going to spend these next few years loving myself. Yes, you have to love yourself to love other people. And yes, you got to take care of yourself. I don't disagree with that. But the purpose of what Christ was saying there was not saying love yourself first. It was actually love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. And so one of the things we need to do is always approach Scripture with a selfless context and realize, because that's who our God is. And that's how He writes. Another one, take joy in serving your spouse and don't see service as a burden. We kind of see everything we do for our spouse as, oh, this is so hard, you owe me. We all fall into that trap. I don't deny it. I do it sometimes. And one of the things is do something special for your spouse without any expectation of something in return. And do this often. People don't often do this. Have you ever done something for your spouse and then you don't do this ledger book where you say, I did this, so I'm going to expect my spouse to do something in return? How about just do something nice for them for the sake of doing something nice for them and not expecting something back? And guess what? Won't they feel loved? Because they know the motive isn't they're trying to get me to do what they want in return. They're doing it just because they love me. See how that difference is? Another one, spend time with your spouse and learn their wants, needs, and feelings and dreams, because they continually change. I tell people every year, relearn who your spouse is, because they're different from who they were last year. Some people are still trying to treat their spouse how their spouse was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's like, they were just graduating high school. They're a completely different person. What they cared about in high school is not the same thing that they care about now. So learn about them. What is now different? Another one, be thankful and content. You know, selfish people always want more. That's the word of selfishness. More, 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 more. How about just be thankful and content? Say, you know what, we have every spiritual blessing from Christ. And I have what I don't deserve. And I have more than most people literally in the world. Let's be content with that. You know, as long as you're always saying more, more, more in your marriage, you're going to make each other miserable. Another one, consider what your spouse loses if you gain, and take the selfless direction. That's the main thing. We look to what we can gain at the expense of our spouse. What if we flip that and said, what can my wife or husband gain at my expense? And let me go in that direction. And do you know what the amazing thing is? If both spouses do that, they usually end up blessing each other in the ways that they need and more effectively. Then love is not easily angered. A definition of anger is an intense feeling of displeasure, tension, and hostility, often aroused by a real or perceived threat to one's self, possessions, rights, or values. Here's the thing. Anger in and of itself is not wrong. And in fact, God at times is angry. And in fact, God created the emotion of anger. But do you know what the difference is of how God uses it and how man uses it? Anger was meant as a means of protection. Have you ever thought of that from God's perspective? God's anger was meant to protect morality, protect people, protect his possessions, protect. Why? It's like if someone's attacking your spouse, you're going to get angry and you're doing it to protect. You're justified in your anger. When something's wrong, you're justified in that anger because you're trying to preserve and protect what is morally good and right and biblical. So there's a time and place for that. But what man does is we don't use it to protect. We use anger to harm. God uses it to protect. Man uses it to harm. And this is where we need to realize we need to learn not to be angry. And it's easy to be angry. All of us are angry. Sometimes I get angry. Why? Well, we know all the things going on in our lives that stress us out, burn us out, exhaust us, cause us frustration, injustice from the world and people. But you always need to get back to, but am I using anger in the way God uses anger, or am I using anger in the way man uses anger? And that's a different perspective. Ephesians 4:26-27 says, "In your anger do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." There are times when I will ask people, do you feel like the devil has a foothold in your life? And so a lot of people are actually quite honest, and I appreciate people are being more honest. They're saying, yeah, I feel like the devil's got a foothold on my life. And I often ask, are you angry? And do you know what I almost always hear from people? They say, yes. That's what the Bible says. If you're in a constant state of being angry, remember, anger is a defense mechanism. If you're always angry, you're always in fight mode. You're always in defense mode. So guess what? In your marriages, in your relationships, if you're always angry, you're ready to fight. And you're ready to win. The reason why you're in fight mode is because it's meant to protect, not to harm. And so one of the things that I often ask people is saying, if you're overwhelmed with anger, we got to work on that anger because that's a foothold where Satan is having influence in your life. So let's work on learning to purge some of that out of your life. And if you go further down Ephesians chapter 4, Paul says it again, just a few verses down in 31 and 32 of chapter 4. He says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. So look at that passage and ask yourself, the first verse, 31, does that grow friendship in marriage? And then look at verse 32 and ask, does that grow friendship in marriage? And then ask, which one should I have? Should I have anger or kindness? Rage or compassion? Brawling or forgiveness? This is something all of us need to work on. I'll be the first to admit I need to work on this. I can be frustrated and angry at times. I can see injustice of the world. We'll even try to justify it. Sometimes I'll justify it. Sometimes I'll even complain to God about it. And then He'll humble me and I'll be like, yeah, you're right. So one of the things we need to do is purge that out. Look at James 1:19-20, how we're talking about man's anger. It says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Do we want a righteous life? Do we want the life that God desires? And that life that God desires for us is the best life we could actually live. But let me tell you this, it will be nullified with anger. And anger, if we're talking like last week, saying, well, what kind of garden, what kind of conditions can I create a marriage in order for a marriage to organically grow? Let me tell you this, Anger is just throwing like pesticides on everything so that the marriage can't grow. It's like every day, just throw pesticides on it. We got to purge that out. And look at what the psalmist said in Psalm 37, 8-9. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Do not fret. It leads only to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. So the psalmist and what the Lord's brother James both said were in agreement. That it does not lead to the righteous life God has for us, but instead it leads to evil. Have you ever noticed that? And in fact, it's that foothold of Satan. You want freedom from Satan's control? Let's work on getting rid of the anger. Let's be honest about why you're angry. Let's not be victims about it, but let's actually change what we can change and control what we can control. And the other part, give it to God, and then work on character and to purge out the anger. Maybe you need forgiveness. Maybe you need peace. Maybe you need repentance. Maybe you need growth. Maybe you need holiness. But we got to purge that out. So how is unbiblical anger manifested? Immediate response of flash rage before listening or complaining. Another one, a willingness to use words and actions improperly to hurt others. A growing attitude of bitterness, resentment, and victimization. You know, victims are usually angry. People who are resentful are angry. People who are bitter, bitterness really is anger becoming character. That's really a good way of summarizing what bitterness really is. A lack of self-control. That's what unbiblical anger is. Blaming others for all the problems or experiences you have in life. An unwillingness to let things go and forgive. Continuously bring up the faults of others anytime the other person does wrong. Remember, has anyone ever done that before? All the wrongs of your spouse, and you'll say, I forgive you, and then they do something wrong, and then, bam, here's all the things you did wrong in our lives. That's not going to help things grow. Or how about this one? A spirit unwilling to grow, improve, or change. You know, people a lot of the times would rather be angry rather than change. And I often ask people that. Would you rather want anger or do you want change? Most people want anger. It feels good. I'm not going to lie. Sometimes it feels good to be angry. It feels good sometimes. You feel justified. You feel like, yeah, stick it to them. They deserve it. Feel the wrath of me. I was going to say God, but that's a little going too far. But do you see what I mean there? So here's some advice. Remember, God gave you grace when you deserved His wrath. This is another thing that I brought back. It goes back to grace. It goes back to avoiding what we actually deserve. God is always justified in His anger. We're not. There's a reason why God's anger and man's anger is different. Different purpose, different intentions, different motivations. But this is where grace covers over a multitude of sins. Love covers over a multitude of sins. It is the glory of God to overlook an offense. Ask yourself, and this is one of the things I always ask people if you're angry. It's okay to be angry if it meets these criteria. 1, is it biblical? Is it God's anger or man's anger? 2, is it righteous? Do you have we see the sin that was going on. The prophets were justifiably angry at the state of what was happening in their time, and they sought to change it. 3rd, is it controlled? There's a difference between an uncontrolled angry person and a controlled angry person. You can have controlled anger. And 4th, is it time limited? Did you see what Ephesians 4 says? Do not let the sun go down on your anger. So even Paul says, and by the Holy Spirit says, you know what? It's okay to be angry, but put a cap on it. When the sun goes down, be done. At max, 24 hours. Be done with it. Move on. That's a hard thing to do, but that's really what God's telling us to do. And that's what God does, isn't it? His anger is always biblical. It's always righteous focus. He always controls it, so it's not uncontrolled. And it's even time limited. God is God always angry with us? No. You know? He's slow to anger, and then His anger dissipates. And the anger that He has promotes us to a righteous living, not just to spank us. Do you see how God uses his anger to protect rather than harm? Another one is learn to listen and understand first. You know, a lot of the problems I have with people is always communication. That's why every marriage thing always has communication. Remember, the words and actions done in anger have lasting effects and consequences. This is something that people need to learn. The worst words you ever say, the worst decisions you ever make in your life are almost always when you're angry. So if you don't want to ruin your life, this is why smart people make a lot of dumb decisions, because they get angry. And you would always ask, how can a smart person like that make such a dumb decision? Because when you're angry, so much of your filters of right and wrong and things like that go out the window. That's why it's a foothold for the devil. The worst decisions you make in your life are almost always when you're angry. Learn to develop self-control and take responsibility and don't blame others. Yes, I agree. When there's conflict, it's probably all sides of the relationship are probably at fault somewhere. But don't just put all the blame on the other person. You take ownership of your part in the conflict, and you humble yourself, apologize, and change. Yes, they probably need to as well. But you can't force them to necessarily. But you learn, despite whether they change or not, whether they take responsibility or not, you take responsibility for what you can. Another one, use I statements rather than you statements and avoid absolute statements. It's like saying, I feel this way rather than, you are a dirtbag. See the difference? I feel you're a dirtbag. You are a dirtbag, you know. Makes it slightly better. And avoid absolute statements. That's like, you're always doing this. Well, are they always doing it? All they got to do is not do it once and your statement's false. It sounds powerful when you're arguing, but it's typically a lie. So purge that out. Take a time out and pray and think before you speak or act. This is one of the things I need to work on and wish I could work on when I was younger. I wish I would have learned this when I was 5 years old. You know, just take a breather, go and pray about it, then come back. And then guess what? After talking to God, it changes your perspective on things. You think, oh, maybe that wasn't as important as I thought it was. Or, you know what? Yeah, I may be right, but is it really that important? Another one, don't exaggerate, don't make things worse with exaggeration or reciting the laundry list. Here's the thing about anger. People like to laugh about guys and their fish stories. Anger takes minnows and turns them into whales. It's like your spouse said something mean to you. And then after brewing on it all day, at the end of the day, you're like, my wife said I was the worst scum on earth and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no, she just said use something simpler. You see how when we dwell on things in anger, we take things and we make them into whales. We make the fish story way bigger. And then we start creating our laundry list of how horrible our spouse is. Does that create an environment for friendship? No. Truly forgive. This is one of the things, one of the ways, if you're really going to be honest, people will often disguise their anger with hurt. Now, usually people will both have anger and hurt. And in a counseling situation, this is one of the hardest things I have to get through to people is, yes, you are hurt, but you're also manifesting anger. And you got to learn to deal with the anger. Yes, you are going to be hurt. You're going to suffer at the hands of other people, consequences and situations that were not of your own doing. I get that. But we also realize we can sometimes mask hurt and justify hurt, anger, and say, it's just hurt. No, it's also anger. So let's work on the anger part. And part of that is learning to forgive and seek peace, not holding grudges and letting things go. Another one is communicate your expectations with one another, write them down and create a plan to meet them. You know, I've emphasized this in multiple sermons, that I believe expectations are one of the main causes for why people are dissatisfied in marriage. Is one, they don't have expectations that are biblical, communicated, fair, or realistic. That's the filter I always ask people to ask. Is this expectation you have of your spouse, of your kids, of your friends, of people at church, the lost people down the street? Are these ones that I have made known? If not, I can't expect this of someone. Because that's where dissatisfaction comes from in any aspect of life. This is what I want. This is how things I perceive them to be. And this level in between is stress. So one of the ways to minimize that is have proper expectations so the level of stress is smaller. because what reality and your expectations are more in line. And so we see here that that's the environment that we need to create. I want to encourage all of you, this week, be a friend to your spouse. Take them out on a coffee date and drink the Lifeblood of Champions. Hashtag sponsored Starbucks. But one of the things is I want you to just be friends with your spouse again, okay? And let's work on purging rudeness and selfishness and anger out of our marriages so that our friendships with our spouse can organically grow again. And you know what? God was not rude or selfish or overly angry. And that's why He sent Jesus to die on the cross, to give you forgiveness of sin. So if today you want to accept the forgiveness of God and be saved by Him, we give you the opportunity to come and repent and be baptized for the forgiveness of your sin as we now stand and sing.